Hi everybody, I'm Greg Fishel. Welcome to bonus weather video number 3 for this week, and just going to take a look back at late last week in the mountains of North Carolina, just to give you an idea when the warnings were issued by the National Weather Service offices and what the radar was showing at that particular point in time, and then do some speculation, and it's purely that on my part, as to what were the main contributing factors to this turning out to be the cataclysmic tragedy that it has indeed turned out to be. So let's go on ahead and get started here. I'll put myself down here in the corner first. And these are the flash flood warnings that were issued for Buncombe County. Now, there were many more flash flood warnings issued for other areas, but I picked Buncombe County because it was one of the hardest hit. And so these are the warnings that were issued, and it goes back to Wednesday evening, about more than 24 hours before the hurricane made landfall, because there was a good deal of rain that fell in advance of the system. So the first flash flood warning came out at 6:12 p.m. on Wednesday the 25th, and it expired at 11:15. And then shortly thereafter, another one, 8:07, that ran until 1 a.m. Now, these warnings were for different parts of Buncombe County, so I didn't want you to think that, you know, the whole county was covered by warnings that were only a couple hours apart. They were different parts of the county that were, specifically targeted. And then on the 26th, which is the evening that the hurricane made landfall, the first flash flood warning was issued at 8:46 p.m., and that expired at 1:45 a.m. Another one shortly thereafter at 9:02, and then on Friday the 27th, warnings coming out at 3:16 a.m., and then at 5:30 a.m., not only was it a flash flood warning, but it was labeled as a flash flood emergency, and that is something you don't see very often, and that was reiterated a couple of hours later at 7:57 a.m., and those warnings lasted well into the afternoon. So they were, and this, by the way, this is the National Weather Service office in Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina. It used to be that the National Weather Service, like the Raleigh office, was responsible for all of North Carolina, okay, all 100 counties. And then when the National Weather Service modernized in the late 1980s and they put in the network of Doppler radars, they made what I thought was a great decision, was that why don't we basically set the forecast offices up so that they're located near where those Doppler radars are, and then the range of the Doppler radar will dictate what area of responsibility that National Weather Service office has. So I think there are actually 7 National Weather Service offices that cover all of North Carolina. You've got Wakefield, Virginia, which covers the northeastern part of the state. You have Blacksburg, Virginia, which covers the northwestern part. Then you have Morehead City, and you have Wilmington, and you have the Raleigh office. I believe, I'm trying to think here, I think Charlotte is covered by Greenville, Spartanburg, and then Morristown, Tennessee covers, I think, the 2 counties in extreme southwestern North Carolina around Murphy. So there are quite a few offices that, basically join forces to cover the entire state. All right, so let's move on ahead here, and I'll just show you a couple of radar loops. This is the one Wednesday, September 25th, and so this loop would have been for the 3 or 4 hours leading up to the issuance of that first flash flood warning. And so if I put this into motion here, let's see if I can do that. There we go. And you'll be able to see that there was a lot of what we call training going on, where the overall area was oriented from south-southwest to north-northeast, and the cells were moving in that same direction. And so cell after cell after cell would basically go over the same spot. And so that always contributes to a flooding potential. Then, as we, let's see, I need to figure out a way to move on to the next slide here, and it's not doing that. There we go, there we go. Okay, so this is the one for the warning that was issued just a couple of hours later, and it shows basically the same thing. Very, very heavy rain with one cell after another moving across the same region. Then we go on ahead here to, if we can, I've never had this much problem before. I'm hitting every button I know to hit. There we go. Okay. So now we go to Thursday, September 26th. So this is the next night when the hurricane is actually bearing down on the Gulf Coast. And you can see that loop there. I know it doesn't look quite as angry, and sometimes the National Weather Service will change the overall color scheme for their benefit, and so it's not always a consistent color table, and so it actually looks to the general public like it's less intense, but in reality it is exactly the same thing as before. And then we go on to Thursday the 26th at just a slightly later time, and again you can see the same basic idea here with areas of heavy rain continuing to move from south to north. This one then goes until 3:15 in the morning. And again, the yellows and the oranges continue to move up. This time they look like they're coming up more from the south and southeast. And then a couple of hours later, again, big areas of yellow and orange moving across the area. And then finally, this is the last loop ending at 7:50 a.m. on Friday morning. And even at the end of the loop, you can see that there is still a lot of heavy rain to come from the south and the southeast. Now, this is a storm total rainfall estimate at 6:12 p.m. on Wednesday. This is more than 24 hours before landfall. And you can see that these areas in and around Asheville have already picked up 2 to 3 inches of rain, okay? And this sort of reminds you of the situation with Fran that hit Raleigh back in 1996, is that we had a lot of rain leading up to Fran, and so the soils were already pretty saturated, and then you dump 8 to 10 inches of rain on top of that, and all of a sudden the soil is like a pancake batter, and it doesn't take much to bring those trees down and power lines down and cell towers and all that other stuff. And then finally, as we move toward Friday morning, and I don't particularly like the color table here, but I did do a query. And if you take a look at Buncombe County, there were areas down here in southern and eastern Buncombe County that had estimates of 13 and 14 inches of rain. And of course, we know from ground truth that there were some areas that got even more than that. I believe there was a report not far from Mount Mitchell that was up around 30 inches of rain. So again, just a tremendous area here. Tremendous chunk of real estate with very, very heavy rainfall totals. So I just am wildly speculating here as to the contributing factors to the tragedy, and some of these are going to be pretty obvious, and I'd be interested if you have any additional thoughts to these. But I think the public in general has become desensitized to flash flood warnings, because flash flood warnings are issued quite a bit, and a lot of times it is very, very localized. It may be a heavy summer thunderstorm and there's some urban flooding that goes on in some flood-prone areas, but it doesn't turn out to be anything that affects a really, really large area. And so when these flash flood warnings are issued, I think a lot of people think, well, I've heard these a million times before, and it's never really directly impacted my life, so not sure I'm going to take this all that seriously. Of course, in this case, it was a situation where it needed to be taken seriously. Conditions with flash flooding can develop very, very rapidly. The famous Johnstown flood that killed over 2,000 people in Pennsylvania back in 1889, once it gets going, it just doesn't take long at all for areas to go from being non-inundated to completely inundated, and there just isn't that much time to react. And so that's another contributing factor here. Strong winds at higher elevations. I think I pointed out that where I was in Perry, the Doppler radar was indicating 130 mile an hour plus winds just 3,000 feet above the ground. The highest sustained wind Perry ever had was 55 miles per hour, and the highest gust was 99 miles per hour. So you take higher terrain and it pokes up into those higher elevations where those strongest winds are located, and that can easily knock out power and cell towers and obviously make communication a lot more difficult. And then I also worry about some of the remote areas in the mountains simply not having access to the National Weather Service warnings. You know, they may not have access to the internet, they may not have real good cell coverage, if cell coverage at all. And so for those folks, something like this can really sneak up on them, and they have no way of knowing that something that bad is heading their way or is imminent. So I think all of these things contributed, and there are probably other factors as well. But I think that one of there at the top is one that really gets my attention, is the fact that, you know, flash flood warnings are issued a lot, but rarely are they ever associated with something as bad as what happened the latter part of last week in the mountains of North Carolina? And so I wonder if there maybe needs to be another look at whether or not there should be a couple of different tiers of flash flood warnings in terms of the potential severity and so forth. Obviously, the next morning when the flash flood emergencies were coming out, but I think at that point we already had reports of really, really bad stuff going on. And so for the folks that were already experiencing that, it was too late at that particular point in time. All right, so that is my report on the impacts and potential reasons for the impacts in western North Carolina with Hurricane Helene. That is bonus weather video number 3. The next one will be coming up on Monday, and of course the next daily update coming up on Monday as well. So I hope you all have a great Friday evening, an even better weekend, and we'll talk to you first part of next week. Take care, everybody.